Okay, so I think we're reasonably happy with the way this gets made. And if we look at this one, the blue one underneath, which is this trunking, you can see that it's just a standard linear gradient. I'm using the gradient map to remap it. I've used the curve here to create this, and then I've just used the transform to basically move it into position. So that's basically to set it so that it's underneath where this is going to go. And then what it allows me to do is I can take off thing off here and then get my levels, and I can blend, and I've got this, the blue colour for it. But if I look at where this goes to, so get this out of the way, so this is basically going into this blend. And if you look in the blend, basically what I'm doing is I'm blending this with this one on top. So what I'm doing is I'm using just a standard copy blend. So this means that the foreground is basically being copied on top of the background, and it's coming in at full opacity. But what I'm using is I'm using the cropping area. So what the cropping area allows you to do is basically cut out the area that you want to be blended in. So my foreground is basically this trunking, which has been dropped in here, and then I'm using this I'm just cropping the top part down so that we can see what's underneath in the background. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm using the cropping to basically make sure that it ignores this bit of the top of the foreground and shows the background underneath. And I've done that for most of these parts. So what I'm doing is I can crop the top and the bottom if I need to be able to add each section in. So I'm just blending one piece on top of it. So that is adding this piece, this is adding this piece, this is adding this piece, and I'm essentially cropping them in. And then this one I am using the I'm doing the same thing, but I'm cropping from the bottom as well. The reason I'm doing that is because if we look at this one is using a bitmap. So this is a Z-add grab from ZBrush. If you remember in another video, one of my videos. So this was the stylized wall piece that was made in ZBrush. So I've just brought this in as a bitmap, and because it's a height map already, then it allows it to, then it will essentially project out as that if we put it into the height. So I've just added a transform 2D to basically offset it so that the wood piece is basically sat there where I want it, and then I fed this in to the blend here. But I've actually cropped the bottom as well because I didn't want the brick section in, so that's basically cropped that out of there as well. So yeah, so that's how the blends work, and the top blends work in a similar way. These ones I just added them on top to each other, so the black just stays the black, and I could have done that with the other ones to be fair, for the most part. And then the last one I'm using the crop again because I don't have this levels blend for this piece. If I go up to here, mainly because this doesn't have, this is just basically an image that's been brought in. So all I've done is I've just basically selected the section that I'm interested in, which is this area here, and I've just done that through a crop. You can see I've just cropped it. I've just cropped the bit that I want. So you can do it either way. And I've blended all those back in, and then that's just gone into the base colour. Everything else is basically being put together. It's going through a set of trim blends, and it's going into our blend node, which is then output into a normal map and an ambient occlusion, which both are feeding into there. So yeah, nothing too exciting there. So the other things that are useful to know, so there's a couple of different things going on here. So this green pipe wire is basically using a bitmap, because I wanted to show how that works. So if I go over to Potato Shop and and open that. So that should be in resources. So that's in my resources folder, so that's the wire PSD. I made this using the pen tool, so I can select it and essentially can edit it. So if I wanted to change the wire, I could just make that change, hit save, and if I go back over to Substance, you can see that it updates it. So yeah, so that's handy to. There's a temptation if you watch lots of Substance Designer videos that people try and build everything in Substance Designer. 100% made in Designer. And that's great, but like sometimes things can be. If you want to have a really accurate representation of the thing that you're making, sometimes it makes more sense to just use a bitmap. And if you link this resource, so this is brought in as a linked resource. So if I go to create a new add from file, and I select, say, this, and I go to hit open, it will say, do you want to link the resource? Hit link resource, and it's going to tell me I've already got it because it's in this project already. So I'll just hit no to that. Then what it will do is it will create a link between wherever that lives. So if I've got this open in Photoshop and I change it, it will automatically update. So that's how that's doing that. So this is basically being linked into a bevel. Okay, to show the bevel node off, we will just drop back into this curves file really quickly, just so I can show you this really quickly, how this works. So say I've got a shape, so let's create a shape. To that, and then with my shape I am going to scale it like this. Then if I wanted to create like a bevel on the outside or some sort of detail or something like that, then if I it's some detail kind of going in like that, then I could add a bevel node. So if I go to here and go and search for bevel and drop this in, what the bevel node's going to do is basically create this offset. So I can have it so that it goes out like this, or I can also make it so it's internal, so it goes in like this. There's two types, there's round or there's angular. In this case you wouldn't notice the difference, but you would do if it was an outie. So an angular shape's like this, and a round shape tries to kind of soften around those surfaces. But if I go back to angular and then push it in, so it's an internal one, then I get this gradient here, and you can see that you get this fall off. So then we can do what we did before, where we can get a curve, and we can create a range of details. There you go. So you can make really interesting details really quickly. And then with the shape, I can change the shape, so I could make it a disc, and suddenly I've got something different. And you'll see that you get this kind of these artifacts in the bevel node itself. You can increase the smoothing, and that tends to help that out a bit, and means that you get less of it. And obviously in this case it's angular. If I set this to round, it will give me something which is perfectly round. So yeah, it's quite a useful node if you're trying to sort of build things from either shapes that you've made or abstract shapes that you've brought in. So if I jump back over to my trim, essentially that's what I've done here with the wire. The wire is just a shape that I've brought in. I've added a bevel to it, I've added a curve to it, which can be changed if I needed to change it. And I've added levels to it to kind of bring it down so it's not so ridiculously tall. I've done a transform on it to move it to where I want it in, so that it fits on the trim where I need it. And then I've just blended it in, and then I've done the same thing as I've done before with the levels and pushed it out to get the colour. This one's done in pretty much the same way. It's just a little bit more complicated. So if we go to the coving, what we can see we've got here is I've got shape. I have another shape, which I've then turned into a transform, and then I have blended them together and I've subtracted this shape from this shape to get this. I've then added a bevel node, and then I've added levels to bring it down. The reason I've done that is because I want to put this on top, so I want this to be lower than this, and I've added a curve to this, and this has created this detail here. So at any point I can go back into any of these. I could change this shape, or this transform of this shape even. So I could change the scale of this shape if I wanted to make it smaller or wider, taller, and it would change this on the fly. I could change the transform if I wanted. I won't do though because that's that in the way. I could change the bevel, so I could change the distance. I could change the type, it's more round. I could change the curves, so it goes in this time, and maybe that goes in this time as well. Get the idea. And I could, and then what I'm doing is I'm blending this detail. So this is another bitmap. This is one of the JRO ornamental alphas. I've just put a transform. So I've brought this in as a bitmap. I put a transform 2D on it to decide where it lives. So I've gone onto the blend node here, selected, double click this one, and then clicked back on this one so I can actually move it into position and see where it's going to go. So I could have this here if I wanted, and then I've blended the two, and the blend I've used this time is I've used the screen, because this will then basically blend this detail on top of this detail, and it will sit on top of it but inherit the details from underneath. So to give you an idea of how that works, if I took this here and put it over here, moved it so it sat over the top, you could see that it would try and sort of blend around it, which looks horrible, but it just shows you that it does work. But yeah, and then I've done a transform 2D to make it tile, and yeah, and then I've fed it back into the trim blend and done the same stuff. But as you can see, doing these type of trims, you get a lot of control to change the type of trim that you've got. This one I put in just because I'd already done one of these type of wires. I wanted to show how you could do one of these if you just wanted to do it in Designer. So there is a pipe somewhere, yeah, substance pipe. There we go. So this is simple, just a linear gradient 2, same as before. So it's going black to white, white to black. I then blended it with this shape node, which has just got these lines repeated, so it's just tiling, and that was so that I could create these kind of sections in it. On the blend, I've just pushed the opacity right down so that it's not cutting right through. If you're looking here, then it's just going to cut straight through it. So if I pull the opacity back, it just basically shapes around it, which is what we wanted. I then used the thing called the direction. I used this directional warp. I changed the warp angle so that this is the angle that it wants things to be pushed in. The amount that something gets pushed is based on a value between 0 and 1. So if you load in some noise, like this purling noise, if I change the scale of this so there's more of it, you can see it has a more dramatic effect. But if I have something that's quite subtle, it just creates a wave through it. It's done there, and then I've added the transform 2D just to basically tile it a little bit more. And the reason why, because I've put this at a warp angle, like an angle like this, it means that it actually bends these lines a bit more, which I thought would make it look a bit more realistic, rather than doing a kind of straight warp like this, actually bending it at an angle. But yeah, the only problem you get is it's just this warping you get where it kind of goes a bit fatter and thinner. So you've got to be really careful. You tend to have to blur these things out. But same again, levels to get a colour, and then trim, blend, and everything's back in. And yeah, that's more or less it. Again, you can output all this stuff. You can output the height map, and you can output all the normals and all the rest of it. Just in here, right click, create output nodes, don't create hidden connections, and then you could go to here and you could export outputs as bitmaps, and it would output the lot. And this base material it's going to output will be this base color, but you could then use it as a mask in something like Painter later on down the line.